Just how dangerous is the job of the multimedia journalist? How are MMJs dealing with those risks? And what responsibility does management and station group ownership have to bear on their safety? I'm Michael Depp, editor of TVNewsCheck, and this is Talking TV, the podcast that brings you smart conversations about the business of broadcasting. This week, that conversation is about multimedia journalists, the risks inherent to their job, and what stations can do to mitigate those risks. Joining me for that discussion is TVNewsCheck columnist Hank Price, himself a veteran former GM, and Adam Mintzer, until recently an MMJ with WIS-TV in Columbia, South Carolina. I'll be right back with them. Welcome, Hank Price and Adam Mintzer to Talking TV.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
In late January, an MMJ named Tori Yorgi at WSAZ in West Virginia was sideswiped by a car while doing a live shot. This drew the whole country's attention to a problem that MMJs face every day, which is their vulnerability in the field as one-person bands. Adam, you spent close to 3 years as an MMJ, and I should note that you're currently on a kind of sabbatical with plans to return to the job. In fact, you're literally at the airport right now. When you were doing this, what were the routine vulnerabilities of the job for you?
Yeah, so I was an MMJ one in the most traditional sense. Write it, shoot it, pitch it, go live on your own the vast majority of days. And one of the roles I had until very recently was the State House reporter. So I served about 7 different gray stations within the South Carolina area, doing live shots for them at the 5 and 6 o'clock newscasts. So very much so, kind of dialing in and out of IFBs, checking shots, making sure everything was okay as I went through and went live for all these different stations. So that kind of stuck in this one position for hours. I mean, sometimes 2-3 hours on end. With no one else with you. You try to make it as safe as possible. You try to make sure it's an environment you know, but sometimes you have to go live where you have to go live. And the story needs to go up there and you need to report on it as you will. So you mentioned the sideswiping incident. And I feel comfortable saying for me, and I know many MMJs that I talk to, all of us, when we saw that, we were thinking that could have so easily been us, or thought about close calls or other instances that stuff like that has happened, whether it was people coming up, whether it was cars, you name it. So that kind of safety aspect really did hit home. And it was something that I was talking about for weeks on end. I had just left the industry, as you said, just going to be a quick little sabbatical. Have some other educational things, wanted to learn Spanish, get to know family in different parts of the world real quick before going back into journalism and get ahead of burnout, which I know is a whole different discussion on its own right. So that's kind of where I'm coming from into this conversation.
Well, so how did being, if you can further elaborate on how being an MMJ impaired your sense of situational awareness, because that's what happened to the reporter with the car. You know, she couldn't really see it coming because she was doing a live shot on camera. How routine of an issue was that for you?
Not knowing what's coming up to me was, I would argue, pretty much a daily event. I mean, sometimes it could be very kind. It could be people saying, "Thank you so much for you do. I love your work." Sometimes it could be people, I mean, I was reporting on state politics, sometimes extremely hot button issues. People would overhear a line that I was saying and want to chime in with their opinion on it. That was I would argue, daily occurrence, more or less, especially if you're doing about 7 to 12 live shots in a 2-hour time span. That is a lot of time to give people an option to come up. And once they see that you're stable, you're not going anywhere, they see that as an opportunity to either start a discussion or to interrupt. you don't have much situational awareness. You do what you can. You look over your shoulder during a VO. You use a soundbite as a moment to tell somebody to shoo away because you're live. But you know how bad it looks to just look at the kind of preview monitor that you have on your camera when you MMJ. Imagine if I'm looking left, right, up, down all the time. I mean, that's extremely distracting to a viewer. And you have to be conscious of that. Not only light changing in the background because 5 and 6 o'clock sunlight's going to change. Is my zoom? Am I still focused? Am I dialed into the right IFB? Did something change in my script? Did my VO not drop? All those other issues that you have, you want to make them the priority because you want it to be clean on air. But at the same time, you are in the field, and the field means, as we all know, something that anything could happen. So you don't have awareness. You learn. I would try to go to spots that I recognized and that I knew. So if I heard a creak from a branch, I kind of knew that's a safe noise, that's not a safe noise. But you just have to develop a very strong gut is this a danger or is this a threat I can deal with?
Hank, as a former GM, can you put a little historical context around the emergence of the MMJ? You posited in a recent column that this position came about solely because of economics. So what's your take on the history there?
Well, it came out of the recession of 2008, 2009. That recession was so difficult that many stations were unprofitable that year, and no one knew, will profits return to their former levels? What will happen? What's the future? And so there was massive cost cutting. And this, to many owners, seemed like an obvious way to say. It's not that they wanted to do it, it's that they had to find a way to cut people. And with highly leveraged groups now, television stations don't have the number of people they used to anyway. So that's how it came about. There's kind of an industry myth that it was a result of smaller and lighter equipment. That's not true. It started with consumer equipment, prosumer equipment. It took quite a while for the industry to catch up and say, all right, we're going to produce cameras and equipment, lighter tripods and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, it's still all about the money. And so when we look at something like safety, the criticalness of safety, journalism is an unsafe business, true. But I think from a management perspective, people don't even think about this. I really don't. I think most general managers never cross their minds. News directors certainly aware of it. But group owners, are they aware of it? But I don't think anybody is really thinking about it.
Let's come back to that in just a minute, but bringing us up to the present, how pervasive is the MMJ position across the industry now, Hank?
I can think of all of the national groups, I can think of 2 groups that don't have MMJs. Mm-hmm. Virtually everybody else does. Now, not every group has MMJs in every station. It's right. Some groups will have very large stations, they don't have MMJs, but they will in the rest of them. But I think it is so pervasive that I would call it almost universal.
And leaving aside any qualms that you have about the limitations of the MMJ, which would be a whole separate conversation, MMJs are here to stay in the industry, aren't they?
Yes, because to replace MMJs means doubling the staff, the reporting staff, because you got to have a photographer every reporter. And we wouldn't have to go back in the satellite truck days. We don't use satellite trucks very often anymore. But if a newsroom has seven photographers, 7 reporters, they have at least 7 photographers. Now, I would argue, given the bottom line in television today and what television stations are selling for, stations could do that. But that's a decision that would have to be made at the top group level. Can't be made locally. General managers can argue for it, but the groups have to make that decision.
Well, nevertheless, it's probably in a station or a station group's best economic interests, not to mention ethical ones, to keep MMJs safe on the.
Absolutely. I think though unless something changed, this is not going to change. You'd have to have such a concern for safety on the corporate level. This becomes such a high profile issue, which of course it's not been. It's just now becoming high profile. It certainly should have a long time ago.
So Adam, you worked for a gray station. That group uses MMJs very extensively. How seriously did the station take your safety? And was it proactive about safety measures?
I mean, definitely. There was always conversations of safety. I mean, it's always top of mind. If you feel unsafe in a situation, then get yourself out of there. Tell us what it is, what you want to do, and what would make you feel more safe. And that message was pervasive. I dealt with a number of situations in my time at WIS that management took very, very seriously. And I was very grateful for that. But there also is, and I don't know if I would go back to doing live shots alone. That's something, but I have no problem going back to being in MMJ. I like the ownership of every single part. And I don't know any other way. But at the same time, I don't know how sustainable it is. When I was in situations that were unsafe, and I would report back, yes, everybody said move, but there is this drive that comes with, especially being a young reporter, that you don't want to be the squeaky wheel. You want to do the live shot, you want to do it well, and you want to have the best background, be active, be on the move, and you want to impress. And I think there's sometimes that while you hear that message, be safe, do what you need to do for your safety, there's also that pull in the other direction. I want to make this good. And I think that there's a lot of times when that happens that journalists put their own safety on the side because they want to meet expectations in a highly competitive, highly cost-driven, and highly viewer-focused environment. Right. So that's something that, I mean, the fact that the reporter that you mentioned at the top, she felt compelled to finish her live shot after that. She finished her script. And that didn't surprise me. I mean, I have been spit on in the middle of a live shot. And again, you move the camera, you do it, and I kept going. And because that's what feels right to do. You have the script, you know it, you spent all day reporting it on it, you cut all of your video for it. You don't want to get killed. You don't want to get cut. So you want to make it work.
Right. Hank, in your column, you laid responsibility for MMJ safety at the feet of news directors. What about GMs and above that, the C-suite? Who owns this problem?
I think the owner is the owner of the company. You have to go to the top of the company because it's a financial decision. Financial decisions are made there. It would be a major financial decision to change this because you'd have to change it in all your stations. That you wouldn't just change it in one or two. I mean, perhaps you could add a couple of photographers to go out on live shots. I don't know. That's. But the fact of the matter is, corporations have to make this decision. And let me say, corporations, they don't want anything happening to their employees. They don't want reporters to be unsafe. It's not been a big issue, but I hope that they will start thinking about that. Next is the general manager. It's the general manager's responsibility to say to the corporate people, this is real. I'm here, I'm on the ground. I see what's happening in the newsroom. I talk with the news director. It's real. You need to consider in the budgets. And then I put the news director in responsibility for the day-to-day operation, given whatever resources have been given to that news director. And that's where we need the training. That's where we need, I love what Adams had to say in his last job. I mean, people were concerned about it. They talked about it. But reporters are highly competitive, and nobody wants to be the squeaky wheel. So you can't leave this to reporters to speak up and say it has to change. There's just all the pressures on it. And people think maybe I'll ruin my career if I speak up.
Mhm.
So it's really a management question, those three: corporate, general manager, news director.
So Adam, what are your thoughts on the kind of proactive steps that stations or corporate management should be taking that many might not be? What do you want them to hear?
I think there needs to be, as much as you train an MMJ to use a camera, you need to train an MMJ. And if you are sending somebody out on live shots alone, and even if you're not, if you're sending somebody to door knock alone, if you are sending somebody to do a look live alone, I mean, I know a lot of stations are discussing look lives as safer options, because yes, you can interrupt it and do something else, but at the same time, you are staring into a camera, trying to get something right for at least a minute or two, not aware of what is around you. And I know what I took after a few incidents of my own is I started taking lessons in situational awareness. I started meeting with people with local law enforcement once a week. They understood journalism salaries and they had a pay what you will kind of thing with me. And once a week with two people who train new officers, I took courses in situational awareness, how to react to this. I had discussions on how to use my tripod as a weapon. I had discussions on what side of the car is the safest if I go to a scene that we think is quiet and all of a sudden it picks up again and there's gunfire. What part of the car should you be hiding behind? What you should be looking for? What does it mean if cars back backwards? What should you be checking the tags of cars that are next to you? I mean, those were lessons that I had to go out and find myself that I don't know is top of mind. I mean, I went to journalism school. I went to Northwestern. I went to Medill, an amazing program. I learned so much. Nobody taught me how to deal with unsafe situations or threats that you receive into your inbox. I mean, we are encouraged. Do Facebook Lives, do Instagram Lives, make yourself available to the viewer. With every Facebook Live, you lose a little bit of anonymity. You lose a little bit of privacy. You are broadcasting to as many people as watch your station's Facebook page, which sometimes can be more than are watching Everyday Live, where you are, what you're doing. And usually if you're holding a phone on your own, you're indicating that you're alone. There's many, and I very much so, I loved Facebook Lives, but once I started getting this training, I scaled back on them, just personal safety concerns. So I think there's a lot of training in how to deal with viewer emails, some that aren't complimentary, and how to be aware of your situations once you're out in the field. That shouldn't be things that you have to learn on the go. There are very clear things that can be taught to keep people safer and to make some things preventable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Hank, I'm going to give you the last word here. What's your message to the GMs, the news VPs, even the CEOs here?
My message is this: the general public doesn't know what we know, which is our reporters are unsafe in many situations anyway. As Adam said, the threats he gets, and they're not just threats that come when you're in the field. This kind of thing goes on all the time. Stations deal with it all the time. And so it's time to raise our awareness on the management and leadership level of just how important this is on the general manager's level, because the general manager can be the squeaky wheel. Part of the general manager's job is to be the squeaky wheel because they're the one with the authority to do it. As far as news directors, the more training you can do, the more you can make sure that you with people and that you're keeping them out of a bad situation, the better. But I put all of this on management because a reporter is out trying to do all the things a reporter does, and they simply can't do everything.
Yeah, and I think, Adam, you've given us excellent ideas on the specificity of that kind of training, but go ahead.
And Michael, if I can mention just one more thing. The other thing that I think, if I could put any bug above all of the physical safety things, is please check in on the mental safety of your reporters. I've been unemployed for about 2 months now, and reflecting on all of especially in the last 2 years, every COVID story, every time you're asking a victim, a relative of a victim, how they're doing, those things every single day chip away, especially during a time in the past 2 years where many of your reporters were operating in an isolated environment. And many of your reporters are inherently extroverted or outgoing people who like to talk and communicate. Just check in on them. Make sure that there's systems in place that if they are struggling with a story, that a story is hurting them emotionally, that it triggers them in a certain way. I know trigger is a word in its own right that it's a discussion, that you check in as consistently as possible, because they are more likely than not trying to give it their all, and they might not be thinking about their mental health, and your product will be better for it if your reporter feels like they're working for a station that prioritizes their mental well-being.
Okay, excellent points all. Well, this is an issue that isn't going away, and there's so much more to say about it, but we've run out of time here. Adam Mintzer and Hank Price, thanks so much for your thoughts today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching and listening, and see you next time. A new episode of Talking TV is available most Fridays on TVNewsCheck.com. You can also listen and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify.